morning. Excited to be here. Just out of curiosity, as we jump in, how many of you guys are with a brand here? You actually produce food. Okay. How many of you guys are a distributor? Okay, cool. And then I'm guessing the rest of you guys are retailers. Is that right? Okay, super exciting. So just so you know that you made it in the right session, we're going to be talking about the riveting topic today of inventory management. It's going to be super exciting, I promise you. And we're going to be talking about it from the standpoint of what it's actually like to be a retailer and actually the standpoint of what it's like to be a vendor. So giving you a quick background, you probably already heard the spiel. I started this food company. I grew it over about a decade period of time. We were producing and distributing packaged foods that were healthy to food service locations and grocery. And we're doing something really unique, which was that anything that didn't sell, we would buy it back. Right? You probably have heard the guaranteed sale, and you've probably seen it out there. At that scale of what we were doing was really complicated. And we learned a few very interesting things. First of all, if you are a buyer, if your job is to predict how much product to put on the shelf, you have a really, really complex job. And you have not only a really complex job, but you have a job that basically controls the P&L for the store or for the distributor. You have almost the most important job in the entire company. So why is it really hard to predict how much product you want to put on the shelf? If you look at the history of the American grocery store and how it's evolved, predicting how many boxes of cereal you're going to put on the shelf seems like a pretty easy decision, right? You have some sort of sales rate, and then if there aren't that many boxes, then you start adding more boxes of cereal. Okay, but two things happen. First is, what about shelf life? Today, in the modern American grocery store, you have a cheese section. You have a meat section, you have a bakery section, all with very short shelf lives. And the second thing is, you also have tens of thousands of SKUs now. So what used to be a human decision in the 1950s for a fairly isolated group of items is now become a really complex decision. So how are you supposed to make this decision? So at the very principle, if you are overseeing a P&L, you're probably going to care about this a lot. You're essentially going to ask yourself, okay, how can I maximize the amount of profit that I want for my store? This is a function, it's a pretty simple function. It says, okay, these are the units stocked, your x-axis, and then your y-axis is your profit. So if you stock a bunch of items, way too many, you're gonna have a bunch of them that are gonna spoil, and you're gonna make less money than you could have. But if you stock too few, then you're gonna miss out on potential sales, right? So what is that perfect ideal order? And if you're a buyer at a store, you're making any sort of decision about how many products need to go on the shelf, you need to find that exact ideal order for each one of those SKUs for each one of those days. If you are a distributor in the room today and you stock thousands of items, you know how hard this is. You're essentially trying to make this decision at great volume. Okay, so what is the answer and what can we do? I'm not here to pitch shelf, but I'll explain it for context. We come into grocery stores, we manage the ordering, and we guarantee sales for the stores. That means anything that doesn't sell, the store doesn't pay for. That's what shelf does. We're able to forecast what people are going to buy and what's going to happen in the store way better than anybody else can. With that, I'm going to explain what can actually happen to your P&L. And we're going to talk about the impacts that you can have. At Shelf, we work with 3 of the top 10 American grocery chains in America. We also work with really great brands across the country. Actually, soon going to be 4 of the top 10 grocery stores in America. We work with anything that is from bakery to deli to dairy to produce. And so there are some probably very specific questions you're going to have. But either way, it's impacting your P&L. And if you're a brand today and you're manufacturing food, we're going to talk specifically of some of the things you can do to really increase your sales. So if you're a grocery store and you're thinking about your profits, let's move a little bit away from the standard P&L look and let's look at it on kind of a graph way, right? So if you went to econ class or business class, you probably saw something similar to this. The amount of money you make is the delta between the revenue and the COGS you incur, right? So that little space right there is your gross profits. There's 2 ways you can really increase your gross profits. So the first is to get new volume. And by getting new volume, you're going to be able to essentially get this new area under the graph. And the second is to reduce the amount of waste. And what's really exciting is that little combination value is what happens when you increase sales and you also reduce waste. So here's what's exciting about this talk today and what I'm going to dive into. We have launched with hundreds of stores across the country with all the different categories that I just mentioned. And we have noticed 4 things that are happening in stores that are eating away at your profits and eating away at your sales. And when you implement shelf, those 4 things get impacted heavily alongside with a lot of other things in your store. But these are 4 things that if you want to make a difference in your P&L today, a really impactful difference, these are the things that you're going to want to go ahead and put a lot of focus on. So what are these 4 costly mistakes? The first one is the number of SKUs that you have on the shelf. So this is one that is very contentious. When we come into stores, a lot of the shelves that we jump into have way too many SKUs. And by the way, if you're interested in this, I'm going to shoot out this presentation for anybody's interested, so that way you're going to have a copy of the deck. So what does it actually mean to have too many SKUs? What happens is if you don't have the volume that is going through the system for those SKUs to sell, you're going to be either creating a lot more spoilage or a lot more out of stocks than you want to create, right? So think about a certain unit of goods that you're selling, and you have a shelf life on it that's 5 days. If you have a throughput of, say, 10 items a week that are being sold, like you can't really have more than 1 or 2 SKUs on the shelf for that item, because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to go out of stock and have big holes in the shelf. It's going to look bad. Or if you want to really make sure that you have everything fulfilled on the shelf, you're going to have a high spoilage rate. Now, if you're a brand and you're producing food, this is actually really important, because a lot of salespeople for brands try to get a bunch of new SKUs into the stores. They get those SKUs, and then the ones that aren't selling represent really poorly. And then from the store's perspective, they're like, oh, well, I'm having a bunch of out of stocks, or I'm having a bunch of spoilage because of these products. Even if 8 out of 10 of them are really selling and you leave your poor performing SKUs on there, that can give a really poor impression to the store. And we're constantly in those conversations. See, we play this really interesting role every time we come into a new store. We're essentially translating the data and what is actually happening in the store to the people who run it. And a lot of the questions are gut-based. If they see your product continually spoiling, or they continue to see it having holes in the shelf, they're going to get upset, right? So if you're a salesperson and you're thinking about, hey, what product should I get into the store? Stick to the ones that are really selling. And you can help the store make these kinds of decisions here, right? The second thing is how much shelf allocation you have. Again, classic salesperson issue. They're trying to get as much shelf allocation as possible. Okay, here's what's dangerous and what happens with the shelf allocation. You come in, you're an amazing salesperson, you get a ton of shelf allocation, and you're like, sweet, we're going to load this shelf up. Okay, if it's too much, what's going to happen is you're going to have major spoilage issues. Or, again, you're going to trigger out of stocks, and it's going to look really bad to the store, right? So the way that you look at shelf allocation is a little bit more complicated than the way that you're going to look at the actual SKU count. These are rules of thumb to how to look at it. What happens when shelf gets implemented is it gets to a true amount, and then you actually know what the right shelf allocation is going to be. But when you're going into the store or you're actually working as a retailer, take a quick look and see if you're actually falling into these categories. What then happens, especially if you have buying procedures where people in the store are actually doing the buying, they will concentrate themselves to that shelf. It's pretty natural, as if you're a human buyer, to go in there and say, I need to fill up the shelf. Then you're going to have a bunch of spoilage, right? So if you're going to like come in and do one thing pretty fast, it's going to make an impact, is relook at your shelf allocation. The other thing that we notice a lot is with the high sellers, and this happens a lot first thing when we come into a store, is that shelf is really able to increase sales. Is that a lot of the items where you made arbitrary shelf allocations, you didn't leave enough shelf allocation for that. And so that specific SKU needs more of an allocation. If you make that impact right now, your buyers will automatically adjust and you're going to see higher sales out of the items you actually want to have sold. So this function is really going to help you in a big way. This is probably the first step that I would take in the store if you're not using shelf. So this is a funny one, and this is a funny one because we deal with this constantly. What actually happens in the food supply chain is you have a certain amount of product that is ordered, a certain amount of product that goes on the shelf. At a certain point, you inventory what's on the shelf, and you should, given whatever the sales are, know what's there. But somehow, there's a certain amount of the products that disappear. Okay, so we like to use this term called shrink. We're like, oh, okay, well, there's a shrink, a certain percentage. Okay, well, what really happened? What's exciting is that you have a lot of things that you can do to really make an impact on shrink. Things like receiving. The number one thing in most every grocery store is actually going to be FIFO. And the reason why is because when you have products that are out of FIFO, it's essentially letting products go expired. And so all of your forecasting in terms of your buying is going to be thrown off depending on how your FIFO goes. So when you become a shelf customer, actually, you get a weekly report in terms of what's going on your shelf. There's one prominent customer who's got a little over 300 stores, and we show them their report every week. And I was just looking at it yesterday. Majority of the stores have 10% of the products that they delivered are spoiling because of FIFO issues. 10%. Can you imagine their margin impact on that? It's literally because people who are receiving and are grabbing the product and coming out to the shelf and merchandising, they're saying, hey, I'm going to put the new juice in front of the old juice. 10%. That's insane. Like for a industry where you're essentially like on average making 1.9% net as a grocery store, 10% of that is going out. And that's pretty common. Like we see that a lot. So the way that I would approach this if I were you is have the people go into the stores and be obsessed about FIFO. Go in there and you can grade it. There's multiple ways of grading it. We have a system through our app to be able to grade the FIFO in your store. Just a very rudimentary system. If you go on with a piece of paper and say, hey, is this SKU actually in FIFO? Yes or no? And then if in a certain section you have over 5% of your SKUs that are out of FIFO, you have a real issue. And the reality is you probably do if you're a retailer. If you're a brand, I would also continue to go look at this. This is going to make a big impact. Again, this is the perception of your brand and what you're going to have in there. You want to make sure that the FIFO in the stores is good so that you have low spoilage rates and high sale rates, right? Coffee is a great example of this. Coffee, they come in, especially for the short shelf life coffees, they get all the coffee stacked up. Some of the brands really don't want their coffees on there longer than like 10, 14 days. They come back and all of a sudden there's all this stuff that they didn't plan for because they thought they had a ton on the shelf and they have to pull off and they have a big hole in the shelf. Really common. You see this a lot. Also, not too hard to make a change. You can really implement this with some like clean, simple auditing with your team. Finally, and this is a really contentious one, this is one that we usually work through with our customers to really explain what is actually happening, and that is discounts for expiring foods. I have never seen a case that it makes sense to put discounts for expiring foods. There's two reasons for this. One is it's cannibalizing your current sales, right? So let's say you're a food service operation, you're selling pastries, and you want to sell day-old pastries the next day. Your day-old pastries that you're selling are cannibalizing the sales of whatever pastries you're selling that day. And usually the margin for those day-olds is either reduced or negative. And then the ones that you could actually be selling at full price make up any portion of the ones that you'd be selling at a discount. The number of times that we go into a store, and our basic rule every time we come in, we say, hey, we'll start managing these sales and guaranteeing these sales. In our agreement, we say, you can't discount any of the food that's about to expire. The food that's about to expire also makes it way harder for your buyers to predict how much to order. So what happens then is you have this oscillating factor of these products that are about to expire, you put on some sort of discount, then it tricks you into thinking, well, here's our actual sales rate, but the ones that you actually had that at the right margin you want to sell didn't sell, and so you're essentially making a really hard math problem for yourself. If you want to make a really big impact in terms of your spoilage rate in your store, I'd say the simplest thing to say is just end the discounts. There are some concepts and startups today that are thinking about, hey, how can I get these discounted foods in some other realm so it doesn't cannibalize my sales? That's totally interesting. In general, in your store, I'd say go ahead and just stop doing that. I'll conclude on this. My time's almost up. There's supposed to be some words up here, if you really want to make a change on your P&L, these 4 things will make a massive change for you. If you want to also just have better merchandising and have a better looking store, or you want to just have your brand look better on the shelves, these 4 things will make a massive impact, right? And then I'll conclude on this. I am always happy to chat, and that white box is where my email is. Probably don't see that. It's Stefan@shelfengine.com. I'm happy to shoot over this deck to anybody who wants it. I'm sure Fancy Food will also go ahead and shoot it out there. There's a couple people from the team here as well. If you're with Shelf Engine, you need to raise your hand. Perfect. 2 people from the team here if you have any questions. And if there's something you guys want to talk about, especially if it's a little bit math dense, a little bit heavy on some analysis, happy to talk to you about that. I'll be around. So thank you guys.